I'm gonna marry your sister who inherited all the money. You, poor thing, just get lost. My husband said to me with a sneer. Standing beside him, my sister leaned on him provocatively. Sis, it's pathetic that I took both the inheritance and your husband from you. Oh, it feels so good to take everything from you. We're gonna live happily on Dad's inheritance. My sister said to me with a look of ecstasy on her face. Your dad had a huge fortune, and you gave up your inheritance? You're such an idiot. What a fool. As my husband and sister mocked me, I felt a boiling rage deep within me. Are these two really human? Their greed made them seem like monsters to me. Indeed, I had given up my share of my wealthy father's inheritance when he passed away recently. Right after that, my husband dumped me and switched to my sister, who inherited everything. I let out a big sigh and said to the two of them, "All right. Let's get divorced." "Oh, you're taking this well. I thought you'd beg me not to leave." My husband said, surprised, but I had no love left for him at all. There was no way I would ask him to stay. I signed the divorce papers my husband brought and handed them to him. Now I can be free. I'm gonna start my new life as a rich man. Thanks, sis. I doubt a divorced, boring woman like you will ever get remarried, but cheer up. They laughed loudly together. And so, our divorce was finalized, and 3 months later, my ex-husband started blowing up my phone. I couldn't help but smile as I looked at the endless missed calls from him. Realized it too late, didn't you? My name is Natalie. I'm 35 years old. I married my husband, Ralph, who is 3 years older than me, 10 years ago, and we've been living as a working couple. We have an 8-year-old son. His name is Martin. When Martin was little, he was very clingy, but recently, he's become more independent. Ralph was very supportive for about a year after Martin was born. Back then, he was what you might call an involved dad, helping out a lot. But as Martin turned 1, Ralph gradually stopped helping and eventually did nothing. Martin was a baby who cried a lot at night, and even after turning 1, he still cried frequently at night. Shut up! Why does he keep crying in the middle of the night? Is there something wrong with him? Ralph shouted in frustration. Don't say such horrible things. It's normal for a child to cry at night until they're about 1.5 years. Don't say there's something wrong with your own child. I snapped back at Ralph, angry at his cruel words. Oh, really? I don't find Martin cute at all anymore. If he didn't cry so much at night, maybe I could, but he never stops crying. Shut him up already. It's gonna affect my work tomorrow. Ralph seemed to have had enough of Martin's nighttime crying. It appeared that this was the main reason for his lack of involvement in childcare. I tried everything to soothe Martin, rocking him desperately, sometimes even taking him for a drive. Ralph always watched me struggle alone with an exasperated look. Watching you makes me mad. You're all like I'm doing all the childcare by myself. It's annoying. I sometimes talked back to Ralph's abusive remarks, but it often led to fights, so I usually stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Even so, I managed all the housework and childcare by myself, and when Martin turned 2, I placed him in daycare and returned to work. Even after I returned to work, Ralph didn't help with anything at home, so I continued to handle everything on my own, leading a hectic life. When I asked for help, he would say, "I'm tired," and lounge on the couch. I knew I should rely on others, but I didn't turn to my parents. My mother had passed away when I was young, and my father was elderly, so I didn't want to burden him. I have one sister, but we've always had a bad relationship. More accurately, my sister has always hated me. Her name is Alice, and she's 3 years younger than me, so she's 32 now. Alice has always been the type who couldn't stand not being the center of attention. She hated when I, as her older sister, was given priority. One memory with Alice stands out vividly. It was the day our father bought me a new dress. My favorite dress had become worn from frequent use, so our father got me a new one. a bright dress with a sunflower pattern. I was so happy and thanked my father repeatedly, making him smile. But that happy moment was soon ruined by Alice. She came running in from another room, shouting, "Hey! What's with that dress? Why does she get a new dress and not me? It's not fair. You just got a new sweater and skirt recently." Even though I said that, Alice wasn't satisfied and cried to our father, "Dad, buy me a dress too. It's not fair she gets one and I don't. Buy me one too." Despite our father's attempts to calm her, Alice kept crying and begging. Eventually, our father gave in and bought her a dress as well. Alice always envied me, but I was never treated specially. Yet, she always complained, saying, "It's not fair," and often troubled the adults around us. When we were little, the adults would often give in to Alice's whims because she was the younger sibling. As we grew older, they told her to be patient more often, but Alice would argue and find ways to get what she wanted. She often looked down on me, bragging about how she was more loved by others. Alice disliked me for calmly admonishing her every time. She grew up with her selfish personality, and when she entered college, she moved out. Now, she doesn't have a stable job and lives off various benefactors. She haven't gotten married yet. I haven't been in touch with Alice for many years, and I plan to keep my distance from her. The last time I saw Alice was at my wedding. She showed up in a flashy white dress, almost outshining me. Alice definitely knew that wearing white dress to a wedding was bad manners. She wore it intentionally. I will never forget the look on her face when she sneered at me in my wedding dress and said, "It doesn't suit you at all. Is your face swollen? Did you even go to a bridal spa?" During the reception, she drank a lot of wine, got very drunk, and flirted with several men. I haven't seen her since that day. Although I still have her contact information, I have no reason to reach out to her. It seems she never goes back home either. I've considered divorcing Ralph several times over the years. But, even though he's a terrible father, he's still the only father Martin has. I couldn't bring myself to go through with the divorce. Then one day, I got a call saying my father had suddenly fallen ill and was rushed to the hospital. I explained the situation to my boss and hurried to the hospital. I tried to contact Alice, but she didn't answer her phone, so I sent her an email. After a while, I received a reply from Alice. "Oh, is Dad dying? Well, he's old. I can't go to the hospital today, I have a date. Let me know the time and place of the funeral." It's not even confirmed that he will die, and she's already talking like this. Prioritizing a date over her own parent is just unbelievable. I was dumbfounded by Alice's lack of common sense. Meanwhile, Ralph also rushed to the hospital. "How is your dad?" Ralph seemed to have come in a hurry, breathing heavily. "He's in critical condition." "Ralph, thank you for worrying about my father." Honestly, I was surprised Ralph was so concerned about my father. Ralph and my father didn't have a bad relationship, but they weren't particularly close either. In the end, my father passed away. Alice never showed up at the hospital, so Ralph and I saw him off. "Dad!" I cried, clinging to my father's lifeless body, while Ralph also cried, almost excessively. It looked a bit unnatural. Ralph helped with the funeral arrangements, and I informed Alice of the time and place. 4 days after my father's death, we held the funeral and Alice arrived with a big smile on her face. "It's been a while, sis. Hey, let's talk about the inheritance now." She spoke in an overly cheerful voice, almost with hearts at the end of her sentences. Actually, my father was a wealthy man. Since our mother died when we were young, Alice and I are the only heirs. I calmly told Alice. "Today is Dad's funeral. Let's talk about the inheritance another day." Alice looked displeased, but I ignored her and went around greeting the people who came to my father's funeral. That night, after putting Martin to bed, I told Ralph, "I'm thinking of renouncing my inheritance from Dad." Ralph raised his voice in surprise. "What? Why?" Don't shout, you'll wake Martin. I've thought about it a lot and decided to renounce my inheritance. I tried to explain, but Ralph cut me off angrily. Why would you give up the inheritance? That's ridiculous. Your dad had a huge fortune. You're a fool to not take it. Calm down. We can't have a rational conversation if you're like this. Ralph's furious reaction made me increasingly suspicious. How can I calm down? I will never forgive you for giving up the inheritance. Don't be stupid. As Ralph turned red with anger, a suspicion crossed my mind. Had Ralph been after my father's inheritance all along? I decided to confront him directly. Ralph, were you after my father's inheritance? Was all that crying when he died just an act? Ralph sneered and said mockingly. Yeah, so what? I was happy when your old man died. I thought I'd finally become rich. Ralph's confession made my vision darken with anger and disappointment. How could he say something so horrible so casually? He seemed more like a monster than a human to me. Fine. But no matter what you say, I'm still renouncing my inheritance. I said quietly. Ralph shouted, "You're a complete idiot," but my resolve didn't waver. Later, I informed Alice of my decision to renounce the inheritance, and she ended up inheriting everything. Once Alice officially inherited everything, Ralph lost all interest in me. He barely spoke to Martin and came home later and later. Eventually, he stopped coming home altogether. Dad's been busy with work, huh? Yes, Martin, he's very busy. Don't worry about it. I often reassured Martin, who was worried about his father. Some time later, Ralph sent me a message saying, "We need to talk tonight." I asked a neighborhood mom friend to look after Martin. I had a feeling Martin shouldn't be there for this conversation. That night, Ralph came home with someone. Sorry for intruding. I recognized the voice. Sorry for showing up out of the blue, sis. Yes, the person with Ralph was my sister, Alice. Seeing Ralph's smug face, I had a good idea of what was coming next. We sat around the table, and Ralph began to speak confidently. I'm gonna divorce Natalie and marry Alice. Really? Is it because Alice inherited all of Dad's money? At my question, Ralph burst into laughter. If you knew that, why did you renounce the inheritance? You're such an idiot. If you had taken the inheritance, we wouldn't be getting divorced. As I stayed silent, Ralph continued to mock me. You're not just stupid for giving up the inheritance, you're not even attractive. Alice is way prettier. When I saw her at your dad's funeral, she looked even more beautiful than before. I knew I had to leave you and be with her. Apparently, Ralph had made a move on Alice. Sis, it's pathetic that I took both the inheritance and your husband from you. Oh, it feels so good to take everything from you. We're gonna live happily on Dad's inheritance. Alice said to me with a look of ecstasy. So, I'm marrying Alice, who inherited all of your dad's money. You, poor thing, just get lost. Ralph said, and both of them laughed loudly. I let out a big sigh and told them. All right, Ralph, let's get divorced. Oh, you're taking this well. I thought you'd beg me not to leave. Ralph said, surprised, but I had no love left for him. There was no way I would ask him to stay. How arrogant could this man be? But I'm taking custody of Martin. When I said this, Ralph seemed to remember and mumbled, oh. Of course, that's fine. Kids would just get in the way of my new luxurious life with Alice. I totally forgot about Martin until now. Well, I do have a son, don't I? What a horrible man. I was really glad Martin wasn't here to hear this. The thought of Martin hearing such words sent chills down my spine. I suppressed my urge to yell at Ralph and calmly said, I'll be asking for alimony and child support through a lawyer later. Huh? If you want money, why did you renounce the inheritance? Ralph laughed mockingly. Exactly. Sis, you make no sense. Alice sneered, clinging to Ralph. I'll throw a few $100,000 your way. After all, we've got your dad's huge inheritance now. Don't forget you said that. Do you have the divorce papers? I asked, and Ralph exclaimed, "Oh, right," as he pulled the papers out of his bag. I've already filled out my part, so you just need to sign. Got it. I filled in my part and handed the papers back to Ralph. All right, we're divorced now. Thanks, sis. But you're playing in 35, so good luck getting remarried. Yeah, Alice is right. Your life is gonna be hell now. Miserable old hag. Ignoring their laughter, I said firmly. Since we're done here, I'm going to pick up Martin. Please don't come back to this house until I'm ready to leave. I said that and headed to my friend's house to pick up Martin. The moment Martin saw me, he shouted joyfully, "Mom," and ran to me with a big smile. His cuteness, combined with the stress from earlier, almost brought me to tears. I thanked my friend and gave her the department store sweets I had bought in advance. Noticing my state, she seemed to sense that something was wrong and expressed her concern. "Natalie, you don't look well. If you need anything, feel free to rely on me." Her kindness almost made me cry again. I thanked her repeatedly, and Martin and I left her house. Holding Martin's hand, we walked down the street at night. Martin was humming happily, swinging my hand as he walked. Tears welled up in the corners of my eyes, perhaps because of my emotional state. But this was no time for tears. After all, I had no reason to cry. The ones who would suffer were those two, not me. I resolved that this would be the last time I cried. From now on, Martin and I would live a happy life together. When we returned home, Ralph and Alice were already gone. I quickly started looking for a new place. After checking online, I went to a real estate agency and signed a contract. I was lucky to find a good property in the same school district as Martin's current elementary school. I didn't want to change Martin's environment too much, so I focused on finding a place within the district. After preparing for the move, Martin and I left the house. Later, through a lawyer, I demanded child support and alimony from Ralph. I also demanded alimony from Alice, and perhaps feeling emboldened by her inheritance, they both paid the requested amounts in full. With that money, I established a stable life and started a new life with Martin. Martin seemed to really like our new home. He also accepted the divorce smoothly. "As long as I have you, Mom, I'm happy," he said with a smile. Ralph had only taken care of Martin until he was 1 year old, and after that, they had minimal interaction. Since I declared I was renouncing the inheritance, Ralph's interactions with Martin had become even more distant, and to Martin, having a father or not made no difference. I vowed to make Martin happier than ever before. Fortunately, I had my job, and the alimony and child support from Ralph and Alice, so I had no worries about our livelihood. From then on, Martin and I lived a peaceful and happy life. 3 months after the divorce, I suddenly got a call from Ralph. But I was at work, so my phone was in my bag, and I didn't notice the call. When I checked my phone after work, I saw the missed calls from Ralph for the first time. There were dozens of missed calls. There was also a voicemail, and I listened to Ralph's urgent voice. "Call me back immediately." I laughed to myself and whispered, finally realized, "Did you?" I didn't call back. I put my phone in my bag and headed home. On the train, Ralph kept calling, so I turned off my phone, annoyed. I picked Martin up from after-school care, and we went home and had dinner together. By then, I had completely forgotten about Ralph's calls. While we ate, Martin excitedly told me about his day at school. Listening to Martin was my favorite thing. After cleaning up from dinner, I remembered I had turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, Ralph called immediately. I thought about ignoring it again but was curious about their current situation, so I answered. Luckily, Martin was in another room doing homework, so he wouldn't hear the conversation. "Hello?" "Hey. I've been calling you over and over. I left voicemails too. Why didn't you answer?" Ralph sounded furious, practically shouting. "Calm down. Let's talk rationally. What do you want? I had a good idea of why he was calling, but I feigned ignorance. You tricked us. You knew your dad had massive debts, didn't you? As expected, Ralph accused me. I couldn't help but smile. Why are you laughing? So you knew. That's why you renounced the inheritance, right? Yes, my dad had debts that outweighed his assets. He had fallen victim to a real estate scam, taking on debts from an apartment investment. A longtime friend had persuaded him into it, and he hadn't suspected a thing. Inheriting my father's estate meant inheriting his debts. So I renounced it. Yes, I knew about the debts. But saying I tricked you is unfair. So you did trick us. You didn't say a word about the debts to Alice or me. Ralph was furious, his anger almost palpable. I tried to tell you when I mentioned renouncing the inheritance. But you yelled at me and wouldn't listen. I spoke calmly, unlike Ralph. Don't make it sound like it's my fault. It is your fault. Ralph kept yelling. But then he changed his tone, speaking triumphantly. Well, your plan won't work. You wanted to make us suffer, right? But we'll renounce the inheritance too. We figured it out just in time. What? I couldn't help but let out a surprised sound at Ralph's misunderstanding. Yeah, you heard me. We're renouncing it too. You can't. What? Now Ralph sounded confused. It's been 9 months after Dad died, so you can't renounce it anymore. No, it can't be true. Ralph's voice trembled. It's true. You can verify it easily. Make sure to tell Alice that you can't renounce the inheritance anymore. No, no, no. If we can't renounce it, what will happen to us? We'll be drowning in debt. That's right. But it's no longer my concern, so I'll hang up now. I said and hung up the phone. As expected, Ralph and Alice were saddled with massive debt and ended up living a difficult life to pay it off. 3 months passed. Since it was a holiday, Martin and I made lots of pancakes with various toppings and enjoyed a fancy breakfast. Then my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Alice. I considered ignoring it, but knowing she would keep calling, I decided to answer. However, I didn't want Martin to overhear the conversation. So I told him, Mom needs to take a call. Keep eating, and went to another room. Sis, help me, Alice said the moment I picked up. Even though she said that, I had no intention of helping her. Still, I asked what was going on. What happened? Ralph is horrible. He's trying to escape and divorce me. I said no, but he insists on divorcing. Isn't he the worst? According to Alice, she and Ralph were in the middle of divorce proceedings. Because the debt was due to the inheritance, Ralph was trying to escape by divorcing Alice. Isn't it awful? I never thought Ralph would be like this. To abandon me so easily. He clearly married you for the inheritance. He said so himself. You married him despite me, so this is your own doing. When I told her this calmly, Alice yelled through her tears. How can you say that? You've always been like this, scolding me with your logical arguments. I hate you, sis. Well, I hate you too. Whether you're going through a divorce or struggling with debt, it has nothing to do with me. Goodbye. As I was about to hang up, Alice screamed in a panic. Wait! I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I don't hate you. We're the only sisters we have, so please help me. I'm sorry about asking for alimony. We're the only sisters we have, so please help me. Give the alimony back. Please. What? Return the alimony? There's no way I'm doing that. There's nothing I can do for you. I answered, exasperated. That's not true. You can give me money. Please. Even $40,000 or $60,000 will help. Just give me some money. I refuse. Ask Ralph for help. Goodbye. With that, I hung up. I later learned that my father's inheritance included stocks, and when those stocks crashed, the debt amount increased. Alice kept calling, so I blocked her number. A few more months passed, and Martin and I continued to live peacefully, having completely forgotten about Alice and Ralph. One day, I remembered them and wondered what had happened to them. Curious, I decided to hire a detective to find out. As a result, I found out that Alice and Ralph's divorce was finalized. After the divorce, Alice worked both day and night jobs to slowly repay her debts. However, despite her beauty, she struggled to attract clients in the nightlife scene as she was getting older. The men who used to support her during her single days distanced themselves when they learned about her enormous debt. Desperate, Alice clung to these men, and one of them, feeling threatened, confessed his affair with Alice to his wife. Most of the men who supported Alice were much older and married. The wives, upon discovering their husband's infidelity, demanded alimony from Alice, further increasing her debt. A friend of mine saw Alice in the nightlife district, wearing a cheap dress and desperately trying to attract customers in the cold night. "Hey, wanna have a drink?" She called out to every man, but no one paid attention to the worn-out and haggard Alice. She was so persistent with one businessman that he shouted, "Get lost, you old hag." The same businessman immediately went into a bar with a younger, prettier woman. Alice saw this and broke down in tears. Even after hearing this from my friend, I felt no sympathy for Alice. She brought it all upon herself. As for Ralph, after divorcing Alice, he got involved with another bad woman. This time, he couldn't escape and ended up saddled with a huge debt. To repay this debt, Ralph took on an extra job in addition to his main job. He worked tirelessly, despite not being young anymore, but his primary job prohibited side jobs, and when they found out, he was fired. Now, he was considering filing for bankruptcy. As I read the investigation report, I couldn't help but smile at the fitting end for such a terrible man. In contrast to those two, Martin and I continue to live peacefully. We recently got a dog, making us a family of 3. My job was going well, and I was about to be promoted. With both my work and home life thriving, I was living a happy life.